Hey guys, tonight we're tiptoeing through the lace-curtained halls and nervous giggles of Victorian England, straight into a topic more awkward than a three-legged waltz. The secret terror of the Victorian wedding night. Forget modern honeymoon suites, scented candles, or anyone explaining anything to you ahead of time. If you've ever felt unprepared for life, just imagine being a Victorian bride. You've survived months of corset-induced fainting, endless etiquette lessons, and now, tonight, you're about to discover in the most bewildering way possible what wifely duties actually entail. Before we sneak under the covers, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this brand of bedtime absurdity. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, what decade you got married in, and how much your in-laws still haunt your dreams. It's always 2 a.m. somewhere. Now dim those lights, switch on a fan for that faint haunted manor vibe, and get as comfortable as possible without the aid of a fainting couch. Maybe tuck your feet in so the lace ghost can't tickle your toes. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it was actually like to be a Victorian bride on the edge of matrimony? Did anyone actually tell you what was coming? Did mothers-in-law cackle behind closed doors? Did the groom know anything, or was he just as terrified? Was there a pamphlet, a priest, or just a bottle of sherry and some bad advice? Would you faint from the corset, the nerves, or the shocking realization that your new husband owned a collection of taxidermied ferrets? Congratulations! You've just woken up at 1867. The bells are ringing, the roses are wilting, and you, poor, innocent, very confused, are getting married tonight. Good luck. The sun creeps through the frosted window as you awake to a flurry of flower girls, frantic aunts, and the overwhelming scent of lavender. Your wedding dress is laid out like a sacrificial offering. Today, you will eat exactly half a scone, tremble in a starched chemise, and try not to pass out from either nerves or the 37 hairpins boring into your skull. The day begins long before dawn, as if Victorians believed marital happiness was directly proportional to exhaustion. You're prodded awake by a cousin who's been up since 4 a.m. boiling handkerchiefs. The first order of business is tea, except it arrives in a cup so dainty you could drown a flea, accompanied by a dry apologetic scone, and the subtle message that you mustn't eat too much, lest you look overly robust in your wedding portraits. As the house rouses, the procession begins. Flower girls dart about like caffeinated rabbits, trailing petals and mild chaos in their wake. One is already crying because her sash is the wrong shade of cream, while another is apparently eating the rose petals, because nutrition is hard to come by in this house. Over it all, the aunts swirl in a hurricane of muslin and matronly judgment, taking turns fussing over your hair, pinching your cheeks, and arguing in urgent whispers about whether your natural complexion needs just a bit more help. The hair ordeal deserves its own chapter in the annals of historical suffering. You sit, shivering in your shift, while 3 women armed with pins, ribbons, and enough hair oil to lubricate a steam engine attempt to sculpt your head into the ideal shape for a blushing bride. It's less a beauty routine, more a siege. One particularly enthusiastic aunt insists on adding just 1 more pin after each adjustment, resulting in a skull that feels more fortified than the Tower of London. Occasionally, you glimpse yourself in the mirror, a pale, wide-eyed ghost beneath a tangle of hair and hope. Now comes the dressing. The wedding gown is not so much put on as assembled around you layer by layer. First, the corset, your ribcage's mortal enemy. You exhale, and the maid pulls the laces tighter, uttering encouragements like, "Just a smidge more, dear. We want you to look delicate, not alive." Breathing becomes a luxury, as does any sudden movement. Under the dress go petticoats, at least 3, each one stiffer and scratchier than the last. By the time the skirt finally settles, you are insulated from both cold and rational thought. Throughout the process, everyone is whispering. It's the Victorian bridal soundtrack, the hiss of satin, the rustle of tulle, and the relentless undercurrent of speculation about the night to come. You hear snatches of advice. Always keep a lemon handy, don't ask questions at supper, whatever happens, don't faint face down, but no one ever explains exactly what to expect. There's an unspoken pact. The less you know, the more successfully you will survive. Endure, transcend. No one is quite sure. Outside, carriages clatter, guests arrive in their stiffest finery, and the entire household seems to buzz with anticipation and mild dread. Your mother floats in periodically to weep silently into a lace handkerchief, mouthing ambiguous blessings and advice about duty and grace. You nod, mostly to keep from passing out. By noon, you're ready, or at least as ready as anyone wearing 6 pounds of tulle and a family's worth of expectations can be. Someone spritzes you with rosewater. Your gloves are buttoned with a shoehorn. You're steered toward the door, your feet barely visible beneath a sea of white fabric. You realise in this final moment before the march to the altar that the entire day has been carefully engineered to make you feel cherished, and slightly hunted. The weight of tradition, lace and nerves presses down on you like the world's most perfumed avalanche. But at least you think if you faint you'll do it spectacularly, smelling faintly of lavender, roses, and an overwhelming sense of what on earth happens next. And with that, the great adventure of matrimony begins. Good luck. You're sitting between your mother and a distant cousin named Hepzibah, picking at toast and praying for someone, anyone, to explain what happens after the cake. All you get are tight smiles, nervous throat clearing, and a whispered, "You'll find out, dear," as the butler offers more weak tea. The breakfast room is thick with unspoken dread, disguised as decorum. The silver cutlery clinks just a bit too loudly, every scrape of butter a thunderclap in the hush. Your father is reading the Times upside down, studiously avoiding eye contact with anyone under the age of 50. Your little brother is banished to the nursery, possibly to spare him, or you, from the growing, awkward silence that hangs over the eggs and marmalade. You try for a normal conversation. The weather, the flowers, the number of layers in the wedding cake, 4, but only the top is real, much like your current sense of calm. But each topic is politely strangled by a volley of sighs and sidelong glances. Hepzibah, who may or may not be a blood relation, keeps fanning herself as if a sudden chill could freeze her solid. She's wearing a brooch that reads "Hope Springs Eternal," which feels less like optimism and more like a warning. Your mother, normally a font of advice on everything from embroidery to handling wasps, seems suddenly allergic to the subject of your impending nuptials. Every time you approach the topic of after the ceremony, she quickly pivots to subjects like the correct way to fold napkins or the dangers of overcooked kidneys. You attempt a subtle question, wondering aloud what makes a good wife in the eyes of Victorian society. She tells you to be agreeable and gentle, as though matrimony is mostly about apologising and not knocking over the gravy boat. Breakfast conversation becomes a tightrope walk across an abyss of awkwardness. Someone, usually a married aunt, will offer you a piece of toast with a loaded look, as if it is your last meal before execution. "You must keep up your strength, darling," she says, and you wonder whether she means for the walk down the aisle or the unknown ordeal to come. As the plates are cleared, the advice begins to ooze out in vague, anxious trickles. You're told in hushed tones to trust your husband's guidance, to always keep lavender under your pillow, and most ominously to think of England. No one explains what you're meant to be thinking of England during, and you begin to suspect that it is code for something the Victorians can't say out loud without fainting. The butler, an ancient, unflappable man named Mr. Dobson, hovers with more tea. He manages to pour a cup so quietly that you start to suspect he's witnessed thousands of these tortured bridal breakfasts. He at least seems to understand what's coming, and possibly pities you. He slides an extra sugar cube your way, a rare act of mercy. Through it all, the household is awash in euphemism. No one utters the words wedding night. No one mentions conjugal duties. Instead, you hear a symphony of sentences that trail off into embarrassed silence. Well, you know, after the guests depart, you and your husband will ahem. It is quite natural to feel every sentence ends in a soft cough or a sudden need to refill a teacup. You contemplate running away to join a convent, or perhaps just hiding in the pantry until everyone forgets there was supposed to be a bride at all. But there is no escape. Eventually the clock chimes and the house springs into action, bustling with hairdressers and dressmakers and reminders that it's almost time, dear. As you stand to leave, Hepzibah presses your hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who looks like she subsists solely on boiled cabbage. "You'll be fine," she says, voice trembling between encouragement and apology. "We all figured it out. Eventually." You're not sure whether to feel comforted or terrified. One thing is clear. In the Victorian household, some things are better left unsaid. At least that's what they keep telling you, right up until you're the one standing on the edge of the great, unspoken unknown, armed with nothing but toast crumbs, weak tea, and a collection of cryptic advice you're pretty sure was invented just to mess with brides. 12 women have gathered to squeeze you into a wedding gown constructed almost entirely from stiff silk and boning. You're being laced tighter than a roast on Christmas Eve. Breathing is optional. Looking radiant is required. The process begins with a chorus of opinions, all delivered in the high-pitched, urgent tones of women who have strong feelings about sleeves. There are aunts, cousins, second cousins, and at least one neighbour who simply loves a fitting. Each of them claims a specialty: bustle adjustment, cuff straightening, train fluffing, or, most coveted of all, corset lacing. The corset itself is a device of medieval inspiration, rumoured to have been invented by a man who hated comfort and possibly women. It creaks as you inhale, then threatens mutiny the second you try to exhale. The first petticoat goes on with minimal fuss, but by the third you're beginning to resemble a decorative lamp rather than a human bride. The petticoats are supposedly necessary for volume, a word that here means obstacle. Each one is stiffer than the last, so you quickly lose track of where your body ends and the scaffolding begins. The dressmakers circle you with pins in their mouths, muttering phrases like "just a touch more nipping in the waist and she'll look like a Grecian goddess," or at the very least, an unbending pillar. By now, your arms have disappeared into sleeves so tight they could double as sausage casings. One particularly persistent aunt is obsessed with smoothing the line of the bodice. She smooths, pinches, and yanks until you suspect you'll bruise in the shape of her wedding ring. Someone else shoves a handful of lavender sachets into your corset for freshness, which is thoughtful, except now you smell like a French laundry at maximum capacity. The real excitement comes with the lacing. Lacing up a Victorian wedding gown is not a one-person job. It requires a team, a pulley system, and ideally a physician on standby. You're instructed to hold on to the back of a sturdy chair, while 3 women take up positions, one to lace, one to steady, and one to encourage. "Deep breath, dear," they say, just as the corset cinches your ribs into an hourglass never before seen outside a mathematics textbook. You gasp, they beam. The family record for smallest waist is on the line, and you are today's unwilling competitor. Once fully assembled, you become public property. Women file in to admire the dress, the silhouette, and, with the steely glint of competitive matrons everywhere, the circumference of your waist. Comments rain down. "She's radiant. She'll never manage a full meal in that." "Did you see Lady Rutherford's daughter last year? Practically a barrel by comparison." You attempt a polite laugh, but the sound comes out as a high-pitched wheeze. Movement is suddenly a philosophical exercise. Walking means shuffling in 6-inch increments. Turning requires a multi-point pivot, and sitting is unthinkable. You attempt a small step and nearly topple, narrowly saved by the swift intervention of Cousin Agnes, who whispers that fainting is traditional, but best left for the altar. Every time you shift your weight, the petticoats rustle ominously, like storm clouds rolling in over the moors. In the background, your mother dabs at her eyes, alternately overcome with nostalgia and terror that you might pop a seam. Meanwhile, the seamstress circles like a hawk, eyeing weak points in the silk and making cryptic notes about reinforcement. You wonder, idly, if she's ever worked in bridge construction. There is a brief ceremony as your shoes are produced, delicate, ivory, and wholly unsuited to actual walking. You slip them on, marvelling at the Victorian confidence that your toes will fit. They do not. But beauty is pain, as every woman here has agreed, often and loudly. Finally, a veil is draped over your head. Everyone gasps as if seeing the moon for the first time. You stand, an accidental monument to Victorian fashion and the endurance of the human spirit. Your lungs are flattened, your spine is rigid, and your optimism about dancing at the reception is fading fast. But you do look radiant. Or at least, you look like someone who will never ever get out of this dress without the jaws of life. And so, the fitting ends. You're declared ready, radiant, and moderately upright. The 3 key ingredients to any respectable Victorian wedding. Each piece of your bridal ensemble carries a cryptic superstition. The something borrowed is Aunt Mildred's handkerchief, which smells suspiciously of mothballs and old secrets. You have no idea what the something blue is supposed to protect you from, but you're starting to suspect it's the wedding night. You stand at the centre of a circle of women, each holding an item deemed essential to your future happiness, or at least to ward off the kind of disasters Victorian families specialised in whispering about. There's a reverent hush as the first talisman is presented. Something old. This, inevitably, is a piece of ancient lace from a great-grandmother whose chief accomplishment was surviving 3 husbands and a kitchen fire. The lace is yellowed, fragile, and carries the distinct aroma of a trunk that hasn't been opened since Waterloo. You're instructed to pin it inside your dress for luck, though you suspect its main function is to provide nesting for moths. Next comes something new. A fresh pair of white gloves so blindingly bright they could double as semaphore signals in a snowstorm. These are a symbol of hope, purity, and the fleeting optimism that you might get through the ceremony without spilling anything on yourself. The gloves are so stiff with starch you could use them to slice cheese. Everyone sighs approvingly as you slip them on, even though you've lost all feeling in your fingers. Something borrowed is where things turn cryptic. Aunt Mildred insists her handkerchief has brought good fortune to every woman in the family, which you find deeply questionable considering the family's history of runaway carriages, spontaneous fainting, and the infamous pudding incident of 1846. Still, the handkerchief is pressed into your palm with the solemnity of a family heirloom, and you're told not to wash it lest you wash away the luck. You nod, promising silently to lose it before the first dance. Now, the elusive something blue. Your mother presents a delicate blue garter, which she assures you is just tradition, darling, nothing more. It's supposed to symbolize fidelity and ward off the evil eye, although no one seems to know what the evil eye actually looks like or why it might be lurking at your nuptials. The truth, whispered by giggling bridesmaids, is that the blue garter is a secret badge of adulthood, worn beneath layers of petticoats and embarrassment. You can't help but wonder if it's meant to protect your modesty, or perhaps your sanity, when the wedding night finally arrives. The final addition is the wild card, and a sixpence in your shoe. A coin, cool and unyielding, is slid into your slipper to ensure prosperity. The tradition is older than half the furniture in the house, and if your luck holds, not nearly as likely to collapse mid-ceremony. You quickly discover that walking with a coin in your shoe is less a good luck charm and more an endurance sport, as every step now offers a gentle reminder that even prosperity comes with blisters. As each superstition is layered onto your trembling form, the room buzzes with nervous energy. There's advice in every corner. Don't let anyone but your mother fasten the last button, or you'll quarrel before nightfall. Walk down the stairs right foot first, never left. Don't look in the mirror in your complete bridal outfit, unless you want to hex your own marriage. You start to feel less like a bride and more like a contestant in a supernatural obstacle course, racing to outwit fate before the reception can even begin. You play along, grateful for the distraction, but the undercurrent is clear. These rituals are less about good luck and more about feeling even slightly in control of a future that's being ushered in by the clang of wedding bells and the ominous jangle of Aunt Mildred's keys. Everyone pretends these objects hold ancient power, but deep down you suspect they're simply a way for nervous relatives to keep busy while avoiding the elephant in the room, the one draped in lace and rumours, standing in the middle of the parlour, wondering if something blue is a metaphor for the kind of marital mysteries no one is brave enough to explain. And as you stand there, wrapped in family history, dubious lace, and a garter that pinches at the worst possible angle, you realise Victorian weddings are less about romance and more about keeping chaos at bay, one superstition, one mothballed handkerchief, and one step at a time. A maid applies powder to your already pale face, while your cheeks are pinched to the shade of a boiled lobster. You're not to sweat, blush, or appear too enthusiastic. Heaven forbid you look aware of what's coming. Your beauty regimen begins well before sunrise, with the ritualistic horror of the Victorian toilette. This is less getting ready and more undergoing a renovation. The goal is to transform you into a vision of fragile innocence, a porcelain doll brought to life by a committee of relatives, servants, and at least one neighbour who claims to have once glimpsed Queen Victoria's eyebrows. There is a strange mixture of excitement and dread in the air, mostly dread if you're being honest. First comes the infamous powder, dusted across your forehead and nose with the determination of a chimney sweep at the end of the fiscal year. The powder's purpose is to obliterate any trace of natural oil, colour, or, worst of all, humanity from your features. Victorian society loves nothing more than a pale bride, so the paler you look, the more pure you are deemed to be. You sneeze once, earning a scandalised glare from your mother, and a warning that movement will ruin the effect. The effect, apparently, is to make you resemble a freshly laundered bedsheet. Next, the cheeks, the infamous pinching for health. Blush, as a cosmetic, is regarded with suspicion and a whiff of moral outrage, so your maid resorts to the old-fashioned method, manual labour. She pinches, prods, and rubs until your cheeks are somewhere between blushing maiden and suffered a mild allergic reaction. You try to look grateful, but mostly you just hope you won't be mistaken for a beetroot in the wedding portraits. No Victorian beauty session is complete without a dash of panic. Your hair, previously sculpted within an inch of its life during the dress fitting, now receives a final inspection. Flyaways are plastered down with rosewater, stray curls are forced into submission, and any sign of unruliness is met with a sharp jab from a comb that could double as a weapon. There's a faint whiff of burnt hair and lavender, a scent that will forever remind you of both weddings and mild trauma. You're presented with a selection of homemade lotions, each one more dubious than the last. Some are made from egg whites, others from vinegar, and one particularly memorable concoction is simply labelled for luster. You suspect it might also be used to polish silver. The maid dabs it onto your forehead, promising it will bring out a healthy glow. You're not sure healthy is the word, unless healthy now means slippery with a faint greenish sheen. Then, the lips. Victorian society is positively terrified of the idea that a bride might look eager. Natural lips are acceptable, but only if they are not too pink, not too full, and above all, not too expressive. A swipe of beeswax is applied for modesty, but you can't help feeling like you're being sealed up for long-term storage. Smiling is permitted, but only in moderation. Too much happiness, after all, might suggest you know what marriage entails. Throughout it all, there's a constant stream of commentary. No perspiration, dear. It simply isn't done. Never let them see you flushed. A lady is always calm, always cool, always available for display. The unspoken message is clear. Beauty, like marriage, is less about feeling good and more about looking the part. As you're finally declared finished, you catch your reflection. A pale, pinched, and polished figure stares back, every inch composed and utterly non-threatening. You hardly recognise yourself. The transformation is complete. You are the Victorian ideal, delicate, ethereal, and very nearly immobilised. And beneath the powder, paint, and panic, you wonder, is this truly beauty, or just another costume you must wear as you step onto the grand stage of marital mystery? You suspect you know the answer, but for now you simply nod, allow one more spritz of rosewater, and prepare to face the day, one dainty, carefully powdered step at a time. The veil descends over your head, blocking out light, sound, and any hope of escape. The fabric itches. You try not to think about the metaphor, but the symbolism isn't lost on you. In the gentle chaos of the bridal chamber, you stand very still as your mother and a chorus of aunts gather for the ceremonial lowering of the veil. To an outsider, this might look like an act of love, a final blessing before you begin your new life. To you, it feels suspiciously like being draped for a Victorian taxidermy exhibit, propped, preserved, and ready for viewing. The veil itself is an architectural feat, a gauzy, milky white curtain heavy with embroidery, superstition, and the faintest whiff of mothballs. There is a ritual seriousness to its placement, as if you are being knighted into an ancient order of the willfully uninformed. The matriarchs fuss, adjust, and tug, making sure no strand of hair or rogue earring escapes its jurisdiction. You can sense their collective relief once it's secured. At last, you are properly cloistered, as tradition demands. No longer a maiden to be seen, you're now a mystery to be unwrapped, very carefully, by one, hopefully not too startled, husband. Victorian society considers the veil the pinnacle of bridal modesty, the final and most crucial defence between you and, well, everything. In theory, it's meant to keep away bad luck, jealous suitors, and any evil spirit who might wander in looking for a +1 at the reception. In reality, it mostly keeps you from seeing where you're stepping. The edges billow and flicker in the drafty air, and you begin to wonder whether the tradition was invented by someone with a grudge against peripheral vision. Of course, the symbolism goes much deeper. The veil marks the end of one life, and the baffling beginning of another. You're no longer quite yourself, you are the bride, capitalised, anonymised, and promptly swaddled in tulle. For your mother, it's a moment of bitter-sweet pride. For the housemaids, it's a chance to gossip about the last girl who tripped and had to be rescued from beneath her own headgear. For you, it's mostly an exercise in claustrophobia. The moment stretches as relatives take turns fussing with the folds, straightening invisible creases, and inevitably sniffling into embroidered handkerchiefs. The youngest cousin is given the sacred task of fluffing the back of the veil, though she mostly just waves it around like a flag of surrender. "Careful," someone whispers, "or she'll summon a draft." There is laughter, but it's nervous, the sort that accompanies any ceremony designed to distract from the fact that no one is quite sure what comes next. You're instructed not to lift the veil for any reason, not to peek, not to adjust, not even to scratch your increasingly itchy forehead. It's bad luck, they chorus, though what sort of luck is never specified. The longer you stand beneath the fabric, the more you begin to suspect that the real function of the veil is not to protect, but to contain. A shield, a symbol, or perhaps, as the growing urge to sneeze reminds you, a gentle suggestion that now is not the time to express yourself in any way whatsoever. The world grows muffled, voices become distant, footsteps soft, your own thoughts oddly quiet. There's a peculiar sense of floating, of being half here and half somewhere else, a liminal space between girlhood and wifehood, between knowing and pretending. The veil is the last secret, the final modesty, the line between you and what you're supposed to be. And as you are led out into the corridor, trailing yards of lace and the hopes of 3 generations, you finally accept that the veil is all of these things: shield, symbol, surrender flag, and perhaps, just for now, a comforting barrier between you and a world that is suddenly, overwhelmingly, waiting for you to begin. The vicar arrives for a chat. He mumbles something about duty, obedience, and the joys of Christian marriage, never quite making eye contact. You leave the room with more questions than when you entered, and a slight suspicion you're about to join a cult. He shuffles into the room with the solemn air of a man who spent his career delivering difficult news to livestock. His shoes are polished, his vest is crisply buttoned, and his expression is one of determined discomfort, like someone trying to ignore a bee in their hat. He greets you with a watery smile and a handshake that suggests a long-standing fear of catching enthusiasm. You're seated on a stiff settee, the vicar perched on the edge of an ottoman, his hands folded as if in prayer or perhaps self-defense. He opens with a prayer, which is nice, except that midway through he seems to forget which prayer he's reciting, and drifts off into an enthusiastic blessing for the harvest. You murmur an amen, and hope you haven't accidentally agreed to till afield. He begins his talk by invoking the sanctity of marriage, quoting scripture in a tone that suggests even he suspects there are more cheerful verses somewhere else in the Bible. The word obedience makes several appearances, always paired with duty, and the kind of prolonged sigh usually reserved for Victorian novels about declining fortunes. The Lord has made man the head of the household, he explains, and the woman his gracious helpmeet. He seems genuinely sorry about this, as if apologising for someone else's party he can't get out of hosting. You wait for something practical, perhaps a helpful tip, a gentle assurance, a nod toward the great swirling question of what exactly happens after the rice is thrown and the guests have stumbled home. But the vicar steers clear of specifics, veering instead into a vague mist of mutual affection, marital harmony, and the fruitful multiplication of the family line. The only concrete advice is that you should always listen respectfully, pray together, and ensure the linen cupboard is kept well stocked, just in case God is watching the thread count. There's an awkward moment when he addresses the wedding night. His voice lowers conspiratorially, and he fiddles with his watch chain, suddenly fascinated by its design. He assures you, in the least assuring tone possible, that all things will be revealed in due time as the Lord intended. You're left with the distinct impression that the Lord has a rather cruel sense of humour. The vicar mops his brow and reminds you to trust your husband, to bear children if you're so blessed, and above all, to remember that a wife's silence is a precious ornament. You stare at him, wondering if he's ever actually met a woman. From the corridor, the housemaids eavesdrop, pretending to polish doorknobs and failing spectacularly to hide their amusement. You catch snippets of their whispered commentary. He's telling her about the birds again. Last week he fainted during the bit about conjugal affection. Even the cat seems to be listening in, tail twitching with what you're sure is judgment. When the pep talk ends, the vicar rises, delivers another nervous blessing, this one featuring 3 saints and a prayer for domestic tranquility, and beats a hasty retreat. You are left with a small pamphlet titled The Duties of a Christian Wife, which has mostly blank pages and a few dire warnings about raising your voice at the dinner table. As you sit alone, trying to absorb the flood of vague platitudes, it dawns on you that the true lesson of the vicar's visit is this. No one in Victorian England, not even the clergy, is willing to speak plainly about marriage or the night that follows it. Instead, you're given metaphors, apologies, and a gently scolded sense that you're about to embark on a spiritual adventure best faced with prayer, obedience, and, if possible, a flusk hidden in your reticule. You leave the room not enlightened, but at least entertained, ready, in your own muddled way, to follow the vicar's example. Keep calm, nod sagely, and hope someone else knows what's going on. Your bridesmaids, half of whom you barely know, are alternately weeping, gossiping, or eyeing the eligible groomsmen. None of them are willing to answer your real questions, though one hands you a lemon as if it's a talisman against doom. Bridal party dynamics are less sisterhood of support and more polite Cold War in taffeta. You're surrounded by a kaleidoscope of pastel dresses, some that flatter and some that seem designed by an enemy of joy. The room pulses with the collective nerves of a dozen young women who've spent the morning alternating between competitive camaraderie and passive-aggressive etiquette. On one side, Cousin Arabella dabs her eyes theatrically, claiming your impending marriage has awakened all her tender feelings, but mostly she's upset that she isn't the one in white this season. Meanwhile, Clarissa, who you're fairly certain you met for the first time just yesterday, whispers behind a fan about Lady Chudley's rumoured elopement with a stable boy. The other girls giggle, pretending they're above such gossip while storing the story away for future blackmail opportunities. There are tears, lots of them. Some are for you, most are for themselves. Matilda has started sniffling about losing her best friend, though you recall she spent last week hiding your hairpins and subtly suggesting you looked peaked in the sunlight. Another bridesmaid is full-on sobbing into her sleeve, but you're not sure if it's joy, heartbreak, or the result of accidentally drinking the lemon rinse meant for your hair. Your questions, hang in the air, unanswered. What really happens after the wedding supper is met with wild-eyed laughter and sudden distractions. Did anyone explain what you're supposed to do when you retire? Silence. Someone asks if you'd like more punch. It's as if the very laws of Victorian society will collapse if anyone actually utters the word consummate. You suspect most of them are as confused as you are, only better at pretending otherwise. Instead, advice is dispensed in riddles. Don't lock your knees at the altar or you'll faint. If your husband asks you to dance at breakfast, refuse politely. Never eat the third course at your in-laws' house unless you're absolutely certain it isn't aspic. Useful? Perhaps. Reassuring? Not in the least. You receive a lemon, presented in utter seriousness by the youngest bridesmaid, who insists it's for luck and freshness, but also that it's handy for warding off evil spirits and apparently unwanted suitors. Fashion is a whole separate battlefield. Each bridesmaid's dress is a study in individual compromise and group suffering. One girl's sleeves threaten to engulf her entirely, another's bodice creaks ominously, and the maid of honour is locked in a running feud with her own bustle. There is quiet speculation over who will catch the bouquet. Arabella is practising her footwork in the corner, subtle as a shark, and open betting on whether the groom will faint, cry or misplace his gloves during the vows. The conversation ricochets from talk of future matches. Lord Pemberley is a catch, but a terrible dancer, to impromptu recitations of poetry, to the relative merits of cucumber sandwiches versus smoked salmon. Whenever there's a lull, someone nervously arranges your veil or smooths your skirt, as though fabric and symmetry can somehow keep panic at bay. It's all deeply chaotic, mostly affectionate, and just a little bit terrifying. These are the friends and acquaintances you'll remember through a haze of lace and nerves, women who may one day regale dinner parties with tales of your delicate constitution or the time you bravely faced the unknown with only a lemon and a quivering smile. And as you prepare to walk down the aisle, you realise in this sea of frills and forced laughter, you're not alone in your confusion. You're simply the only one expected to keep a straight face about it. Welcome to the bridal party, a confederacy of frenemies, all here to send you off with style, speculation, and an emergency citrus fruit. You catch a glimpse of your soon-to-be husband. He looks as pale as you feel, adjusting his cravat with trembling hands. Rumour has it he spent the morning reading a medical textbook and drinking brandy for courage. Victorian weddings are often described as a flurry of lace, lilies, and feminine tears, but no one talks much about the plight of the groom. Perhaps that's because at this very moment He's hiding in the study with a stack of borrowed books and a rising tide of existential dread. If you listen closely, you might even hear a muffled pep talk from his best man, part inspirational, part threat, about the perils of fainting at the altar or worse, stepping on your hem. Today's groom is expected to radiate confidence, poise, and good breeding. Instead, he appears to be radiating flop sweat. His best frock coat is immaculately pressed, his hair oiled to a high shine, but there's something undeniably wild in his eyes, a look seen mostly in hunted foxes and men who've just remembered they never finished reading the duties of matrimony. His shoes, despite the best efforts of his valet, have acquired a suspicious dampness, possibly from an encounter with a nervous dog or a misplaced chamber pot. It's well known among the household staff that grooms spend the morning in a state best described as confused sprint. He's run through his vows half a dozen times, repeated your full name until it sounds like a spell, and in a moment of desperation, consulted an outdated husband's almanac for advice on wedding night etiquette. Spoiler, the almanac is less helpful than a magic 8-ball and twice as cryptic. Brandy has been deployed liberally, supposedly to calm his nerves, though it mostly seems to lubricate an endless cycle of worrying about glove etiquette and the possibility of sneezing during the ceremony. His mother, never one to let a crisis go unattended, sweeps in periodically to remind him of the family legacy, the importance of punctuality, and not to embarrass the lineage with unseemly displays of emotion. The poor man is so thoroughly briefed and debriefed that he can barely remember his own address. There are whispers among the groomsmen, men who've either survived their own weddings or have made a career out of avoiding them. They offer contradictory advice in rapid succession. Say her name loud and clear. Don't lock your knees, you'll faint. Smile, but not too much, you'll look desperate. Whatever you do, don't mention the honeymoon. Their support is less reassuring than intended, but they do make sure he arrives at the church with his shirt properly buttoned and his boutonniere only slightly askew. The real comedy comes from his attempts to practice being a husband. Earlier, he was caught staring at himself in the hall mirror, rehearsing looks of thoughtful concern and gentle authority. The result was a series of expressions that range from constipated owl to man haunted by the price of coal. His final rehearsal of the wedding kiss involved a startled houseplant and a lot of apologising. Despite, or perhaps because of, his efforts, your groom is not the embodiment of romantic confidence. He is instead exactly as bewildered and terrified as you are. Every sideways glance from a married uncle, every wink from a groomsman, every cryptic remark from the vicar is a reminder that he is about to leap into the marital abyss with only a few lines of poetry and some questionable medical advice as a safety net. As you lock eyes across the bustle of the wedding preparations, you feel a strange camaraderie. For all the pomp and pageantry, you're two very human beings, trapped in the same Victorian whirlwind of uncertainty, bad advice, and overly tight formal wear. You both know, deep down, that nothing in the world could have prepared you for this. Not brandy, not textbooks, not even a perfectly tied cravat. But if you're going to be confused, you might as well do it together. And so, with trembling hands and hearts pounding, the two of you prepare to step into the unknown, clueless, confused, and yes, just a little bit damp. Aunt Henrietta corners you with a clutch of smelling salts, and advice that sounds suspiciously like a warning. Remember, dear, a good wife keeps her eyes closed and her opinions quieter. The comment hangs in the air like a damp curtain as she pats your hand with the air of someone bestowing generational trauma. Before you can ask what, exactly, you're supposed to be closing your eyes for, she slips away into the corridor, muttering prayers and rummaging for a lace hanky. You're left standing there, bewildered, clutching smelling salts that imply you'll soon need them. Family advice on your wedding day is a sort of Victorian sport. There are no rules, no oversight, and absolutely no consistency. As you walk through the bustling house, various relations emerge from shadowy corners like emotional jack-in-the-boxes, each armed with unsolicited guidance. Great-aunt Prudence appears first, gliding toward you with a stern expression and a tendency to hiss her wisdom through clenched teeth. A wife must always laugh at her husband's jokes, she whispers, even the unfunny ones. It encourages stability. You nod solemnly, as if preparing for a lifetime of strained chuckles. Your mother offers more practical advice, sort of. She tells you to be patient, gracious, and mysteriously serene, which sounds less like marriage counsel and more like instructions for being a marble statue. When you ask for clarification, She simply presses a teacup into your hands and changes the subject to the weather. You can tell by the way she fluffs your sleeves that she is deeply hoping you will not ask follow-up questions. A flurry of cousins sweep in next, each determined to leave their mark on your psyche. One warns you never to let your husband see you without your hair arranged. Another insists that the secret to marital harmony is never mentioning your opinions after sunset. A third cousin, married only 6 months, and already sporting the 1,000-yard stare of a battlefield survivor, leans in close and advises, if you must argue, do it in French. Men rarely follow. You consider learning French immediately. Uncles contribute too, though their advice falls somewhere between bizarre and deeply unhelpful. Uncle Barnaby, who smells faintly of gin and regret, tells you to keep the pantry well stocked because a hungry man grows dangerous. You hope he means metaphorically. Uncle Thomas advises you to cultivate an air of mystery and to never speak above a whisper, which seems wildly impractical for daily life unless you intend to haunt your own home. Then there's Grandmother Agatha, wheeled in like an oracle. Her gaze is sharp, her voice steady, and her advice strangely poetic. Marriage, she says, gripping your wrist, is like tending a garden. Pull the weeds early, water the flowers, and never, under any circumstances, let the neighbours borrow your tools. You thank her, though you're not entirely sure you understood any of it. Nobody, not one person, comes close to addressing the question you actually have. What happens tonight? Each time you attempt to steer the conversation toward the topic lurking in the back of your mind, relatives recoil theatrically, as if you've announced plans to join the circus. Hush, they whisper. Not proper. You'll learn soon enough. Focus on the cake. The more advice you receive, the less sense anything makes. Some snippets contradict each other outright. Be meek, but also charming. Obey, but maintain mystery. Be silent, but also entertaining. Remain calm, but be ready for anything. It's a wonder Victorian brides didn't simply lie down on the nearest chaise longue and refuse to move. By the time you escape to your dressing room, your head is full of warnings, contradictions, lemon-scented superstition, and at least one piece of advice clearly intended for a horse. You shut the door, lean back against it, and inhale deeply. Your family may not have given you clarity, but they've certainly given you a preview of Victorian matrimony. A labyrinth of expectations, unspoken rules, and whispered threats, all wrapped in lace and lavender. If this is the prelude, you think, the performance is going to be something else. You stand at the altar reciting vows in a voice you barely recognize as your own. Everyone is watching. You try not to lock eyes with your new husband for too long, lest you both dissolve into giggles or existential dread. The church is packed to the rafters with lace, lilies, and people who have not stopped whispering since you walked through the doors. Sunlight filters through the stained glass windows, illuminating the dust motes drifting lazily above your head like a celestial warning sign. The organist is playing with such emotional enthusiasm that you're fairly certain he's trying to drown out the sound of your heart hammering in your chest. Your procession to the altar was a blur of rustling skirts and careful steps, the kind where your biggest achievement was not tripping over your own train or stepping on a stray child. The bridesmaids flanked you like a pastel honour guard, each wearing a facial expression somewhere between joy and competitive envy. The moment you reached the front, everyone inhaled sharply, as though your arrival had summoned something holy, or at least extremely dramatic. Now you stand beside your groom, who appears to be experiencing a spiritual crisis or a mild fainting spell. His cravat is crooked. You resist the urge to fix it. The vicar clears his throat with the gravity of a man about to read aloud from a sacred text or confess to overdue taxes. Instead, he launches into a sermon on duty, commitment, and the sanctity of marriage, all delivered with the emotional range of a damp sponge. You try to look serene, but inside you feel like a startled pigeon. Your dress itches. Your veil flutters with every breath. You're acutely aware of your family in the front pew, staring with the combined intensity of a firing squad. Aunt Henrietta is already dabbing at her eyes, either from sentiment or the exceptionally strong scent of the lilies. Uncle Barnaby has fallen asleep, snoring softly into his waistcoat. Across the aisle, a small child picks his nose with the kind of concentration not seen since the invention of the telescope. The vows begin. They are short, solemn, and bear absolutely no resemblance to the life advice you needed. You repeat each line dutifully, stumbling only when you momentarily forget your husband's middle name. He repeats his own lines with equal devotion, though at one point he calls you my lawful wedded a companion. which earns a few stifled chuckles from the congregation and a panicked blush from him. Rings are exchanged, hands tremble. You silently pray that neither of you drops anything, lest you trigger a chain reaction of gasps, swoons, and general Victorian hysteria. The ring slips onto your finger surprisingly smoothly, either a sign of divine approval or the lingering effect of too much rosewater lotion. Then comes the moment everyone has been waiting for, the kiss. The congregation leans forward as one organism. You and your groom share a look that says, "We have no idea what we're doing, do we?" The kiss itself is brief, polite, and bordering on bashful, precisely the type Victorian etiquette books would describe as suitable for mixed company. Still, the audience erupts into applause as though you've just performed an operatic duet. It's only as you turn to face the room as a newly married couple that you feel the sudden, unmistakable flutter of buyer's remorse. Not regret exactly, more like the sensation you get when you sign a complicated contract without reading the fine print. You smile anyway, because that is what brides do, even when they're wondering whether marital bliss includes time for personal hobbies or if you'll be forced to learn embroidery out of sheer social pressure. Arm in arm, you walk down the aisle together. People throw rice, someone's hat falls off. The organist overshoots the ending by several dramatic chords. Through it all, you maintain your composure, buoyed by the knowledge that everyone expects you to float gracefully into your new life. Inside, though, you're thinking, good heavens, what happens now? And that truly is the most Victorian question of all. As the reception commences, you are force-fed a banquet of aspic, cold beef, and peculiar puddings. The older women cluck approvingly. You notice no one mentions the night ahead. The dining hall is a spectacle of lace bunting, towering floral arrangements, and tables groaning under the weight of dishes that appear to have been prepared during the Crimean War. You are ushered to the head table, where you sit beside your new husband, both of you smiling with the brittle, overextended politeness of people who have absolutely no idea what to do next. The first course arrives, aspic, shimmering ominously, a translucent dome containing vegetables, meat, and what might be despair. Victorian society adores aspic. Why? No one knows. You prod it gently with the tip of your fork. It jiggles defiantly. Your groom attempts a heroic bite, then washes it down with an alarming gulp of champagne. You follow suit, ignoring the texture and focusing on the distant dream of solid food. Next comes cold beef, carved with solemn ceremony by an uncle who looks like he's preparing to duel the cow itself. He offers you a slice so large it could be used as currency. You accept politely, then spend several minutes trying to saw through it with your butter knife, because someone misplaced the actual cutlery, and Victorian guests refuse to acknowledge mistakes during formal dining. Across the table, a bridesmaid whispers that chewing too aggressively is unladylike, so you resort to tiny, desperate bites. Peculiar puddings appear in succession: boiled raisin pudding, a wobbling blancmange, and something called a syllabub, which sounds like a medical procedure and tastes faintly of disappointment. The older women watch your reactions closely, nodding approvingly whenever you swallow something without flinching. Victorian matrons respect endurance. Throughout the meal, the toasts begin. They start innocently enough. Blessings, fond memories, mild jokes about how you used to run barefoot through the orchard. But then comes the cascade of ominous hints. Your uncle congratulates you on embarking upon the greatest responsibility a woman can bear. Your mother toasts the joys of matrimony and fruitful union, and your great-aunt toasts endurance. She does not clarify what kind of endurance, which is deeply unsettling. Your new husband receives his own share of cryptic encouragement. Men clap him on the back, offering advice that sounds like it came from a manual about wrestling livestock. Steady nerves, one says. Strong constitution, says another. Someone tells him to always keep a spare pair of socks by the bed. No explanation is provided. At the far end of the table, the younger cousins giggle behind their hands. One of them glances at you with the wide-eyed excitement usually reserved for fireworks or illicit gossip. She mouths, "Good luck," you're not reassured. Between courses, polite conversation circles around everything except the topic looming over everyone's minds. Guests discuss the weather, the wallpaper, the relative merits of boiled carrots. Someone recounts a story about a neighbour whose horse refuses to climb hills. Another describes a recent opera in painstaking detail, despite having slept through most of it. But not one person, not your mother, not your aunts, not even cousin Arabella, who never misses an opportunity for scandal, mentions the wedding night. Every so often, someone looks at you with an expression that hovers between pride and pity. You try to decode their meaning. Is it a silent warning? A blessing? A reminder that your future now contains mysteries wrapped in lace and locked behind bedroom doors? Dessert arrives. A towering wedding cake crusted with hard white icing that could double as masonry. You and your groom cut into it together, smiling for the room, careful not to reveal that neither of you can feel your hands after hours of shaking and toasting. Guests applaud. Cameras do not yet exist, but you can already imagine your portrait. Two stiff, anxious figures immortalized in cake crumbs and uncertainty. As plates are cleared and musicians tune their instruments for dancing, you sense the tension rising like steam from the pudding. The feast is winding down, the night is approaching, and in the soft glow of candlelight you realize that the Victorian wedding reception is not just a celebration, it is a buffer, a polite, frilly delay before the moment everyone is too afraid to discuss. A delay that is rapidly running out. Your first dance as a married couple is more battlefield than ballet. You trip over his feet. He apologizes for stepping on your hem. Everyone applauds politely, grateful that at least no one fainted this time. The musicians begin with a trembling waltz, one of those pieces written specifically to instill equal parts romance and fear. You and your new husband step into the center of the polished floor, feeling the eyes of everyone you've ever met drilling into your backs. The chandeliers glimmer like judgmental stars above you. Somewhere in the corner, a distant aunt dabs her eyes, muttering about young love, though her expression suggests she's remembering something far more scandalous. Your groom, bless him, tries to guide you. He extends a slightly sweaty hand, attempting confidence. But confidence is no match for Victorian footwear. Your shoes are so narrow you could use them to slice ham. His boots have the traction of boiled cabbage. Together, you form a unified front of mutual instability. When you sway left, he sways right. When he steps forward, you panic and sidestep entirely. To an observer, you might look like two people negotiating a hostage situation through interpretive dance. The applause, at first tentative, picks up as guests convince themselves that what they're witnessing is not chaos but charm. Victorian society loves nothing more than polite delusion. A misstep becomes spirited enthusiasm. A near fall becomes youthful exuberance. And when your skirt catches on a rogue floorboard, creating a moment of pure panic, someone actually sighs. How romantic. As the dance continues, you try focusing on one spot. Your groom's lapel, specifically the slightly crooked boutonniere that his best man pinned on with the steadiness of a drunken ostrich. But no amount of concentration can prevent the next disaster. The spin. Victorian waltzes involve turning. Lots of turning. Your groom initiates a gentle rotation, which quickly becomes an accelerating spiral, because neither of you knows how to stop. Your dress balloons like a startled jellyfish. You feel yourself lifting just slightly off the ground. You cling to your husband with the determination of a Victorian heroine avoiding tuberculosis. He clings back, terrified. Around you, guests blur into a carousel of polite smiles and suppressed laughter. Eventually, mercifully, the spin slows. You steady yourselves. Someone claps, relieved that no structural damage occurred. The musicians, sensing a crisis averted, brighten the tempo. Couples join you on the floor, swirling around in a parade of satin, lace, and well-rehearsed footwork. Compared to them, your waltz resembles two chickens attempting synchronized swimming. You notice the strategic avoidance happening on all sides. Married couples drift toward you, smiling with the gentle smugness of people who have already survived their wedding day. Young single women orbit nearby, pretending not to stare at the groomsmen while very much staring at the groomsman. Elderly relatives maintain respectable distance, unwilling to risk injury from your unpredictable trajectory. Meanwhile, you and your groom attempt small talk. "Lovely evening," he says breathlessly. "Yes," you reply, very spiny. You nearly burst into laughter from sheer nerves, but you are Victorian, and Victorians do not publicly exhibit hysteria unless it's medically sanctioned. The final turn approaches. You brace for impact. Using every ounce of coordination you possess, which is admittedly very little, you glide into the last steps, and miraculously you finish upright, aligned, and facing the crowd instead of a potted fern. The applause is thunderous. Guests beam as if you've just performed a pas de deux at the Royal Opera House. Someone even shouts "graceful," which feels like flattery bordering on slander. When the dance ends, you and your groom bow, because not bowing would give relatives the vapours. You cling to each other as you exit the floor, triumphant survivors of a ritual designed to expose your every weakness. In the safety of the refreshment table, you exhale. The worst, you hope, is behind you. But then you remember, the dance was merely symbolic practice. The real choreography, the wedding night, awaits. The final slice of cake is served, the last toast is drunk, and the band quietly packs away their instruments. Guests begin to slip out, leaving behind a trail of confetti and dread. The great crescendo of celebration drains from the room like champagne going flat. A few straggling relatives linger near the doorway, unwilling to leave before imparting one final knowing smile or cryptic blessing. The air is thick with a strange mixture of nostalgia, anticipation, and the faint smell of overworked lilies. All around you the hall thins out, chairs scrape back, gloves are tugged on, and aunts gather their shawls with the solemnity of priests packing ritual garments. You glance toward the towering cake, now reduced to a sugary ruin of crumbs and icing rubble. Cutting it together felt momentous, symbolic even. Now it simply looks like a monument to the last moment in your life when everyone was willing to openly talk to you. Since then, the conversation has shifted to an impressive collection of topics. The weather, the quality of the string quartet, the rising price of tea. Everything, in fact, except the one thing you desperately wish someone would explain. Guests approach in pairs to bid farewell. Each carries their own brand of ominous affection. "Sleep well," says one elderly cousin, squeezing your arm with suspicious intensity. Another whispers, "Remember to breathe," which raises far more questions than it answers. A third pats your husband on the back and murmurs, "Be brave, my boy," as if he's about to wrestle a lion instead of walk to a carriage with his bride. Your mother envelopes you in a final embrace, smoothing your veil and sniffing back tears. She kisses your cheek, looks as though she might impart some final piece of life-altering wisdom, and instead says, "Remember to write thank you notes." She hurriedly joins the departing crowd, leaving you with gratitude-related obligations and no guidance whatsoever on the far more pressing matter. Your groom, meanwhile, seems to be oscillating between exhilaration and fainting. One moment he's standing tall, waving to his relatives. The next he's awkwardly fiddling with his gloves, looking like he's silently reconsidering every life choice that led to this point. He gives you a shaky smile that says, "We're in this together, and also I may be on the verge of a small nervous collapse." As the crowd filters out, the room begins to look less like a festive banquet hall and more like the aftermath of a genteel riot. Confetti litters the floor in pastel drifts. A lone shoe, no one knows whose, sits abandoned near a punch bowl. Candles sputter in the draught. A bridesmaid discovers her misplaced bouquet underneath a chair and carries it away as if retrieving a fallen comrade. The string quartet, now packing their instruments, offers polite bows on their way out the door. The cellist gives you both a sympathetic nod, the kind reserved for condemned prisoners and contest losers. When the last musician leaves, silence settles over the room like a lace shawl, beautiful, delicate, and slightly suffocating. Reality begins to creep in, subtle at first. You feel the weight of your dress, heavy with expectation. The air feels cooler, the shadows deeper, the laughter further away. The transition from celebration to solitude is rapid and merciless. Moments ago you were surrounded by applause. Now even the servants seem to have found urgent tasks elsewhere. You find yourself staring at the empty doorway, the threshold between the world you've known and the one you're being ushered into. Your new husband clears his throat and offers his arm, the gesture tender and terrified. You take it, equally tender and equally terrified. Together, you walk toward the exit where a carriage awaits, a carriage decorated with ribbons, flowers, and a level of optimism neither of you quite feels. You step outside into the cool evening air, the last of the wedding lanterns flickering behind you. The chatter of departing guests echoes faintly in the distance, and that's when it hits you fully. The cake is gone, the music is over, and you are officially married. What comes next is no longer theory, rumour, or whispered warnings behind parlour fans. What comes next is real, and it's waiting for you at the end of a short carriage ride. You're bundled into a horse-drawn carriage decorated with tin cans and ribbons. The journey is bumpy, awkwardly silent, and feels longer than a transatlantic voyage. The door shuts with a decisive thunk, sealing you and your new husband inside the plush, dim interior like two unsuspecting passengers in a Victorian social experiment. Outside, your guests cheer and wave, polite encouragements mixed with thinly veiled glee at not being the ones in this carriage. The horses lurch forward, and instantly the vehicle begins its campaign to jostle every bone in your body out of alignment. You settle into the velvet seat opposite your groom, your dress occupying roughly 87% of the available space. The remaining 13% is shared between his long legs, a bouquet you're fairly certain isn't yours, and the crushing weight of unspoken expectations. The ribbons tied to the carriage whip against the windows with each bump, sounding like applause for milestones you haven't yet achieved. The silence grows roots almost immediately. Your groom attempts a smile, something friendly, reassuring, possibly even romantic, but the effect is undermined by the sudden sway of the carriage, which sends him sliding half an inch to the left. He grips the seat like a sailor bracing for rough seas. "Lovely evening," he says, voice pitched an octave higher than usual. "Yes," you reply, equally strained. "Lovely. Very evening." The carriage hits a rut. You bounce. He bounces. Both of you pretend this is normal. Victorian carriages were not designed with comfort in mind. They were designed for looking impressive from the outside, while internally providing the sensation of being shaken by a polite yet determined giant. Every stone in the roadway announces itself through the wheels, creating an ever-present rhythm of ka-thump, 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 the sound of romance being lightly concussed. You try to focus on something calming, the faint scent of lavender sachets sewn into your gloves, the soft flicker of moonlight through the window, the rhythmic breath of the horses. But then your stomach reminds you of the aspic, pudding, and sheer anxiety you consumed earlier. You swallow hard. Your groom notices. His eyes widen with sympathetic terror, shared panic bonding you faster than any vow. In an act of bravery, he attempts conversation. "So," he says, tugging nervously at his cravat, "that was quite a dance, wasn't it?" You nod. "I didn't mean to elbow you in the ribs." No, it was quite invigorating." Another jolt. The carriage leans. You both gasp. He clutches the window frame. You clutch your bouquet as if it might offer stability. Outside, the tin cans clatter wildly, announcing your romantic departure to every startled fox and unsuspecting villager along the road. Minutes stretch into eternities. There are long silences filled with nothing but the creaking of leather straps and the desperate inner monologue of two people who are given no practical education on marriage, apart from "don't disgrace the family." Your groom pulls out a handkerchief and offers it to you with stiff formality, as though presenting a rare artifact. You accept it with equal formality. Victorian courtship has prepared you for this. Awkward gestures of politeness while hurtling toward a life-changing event on wheels. A gentle rain begins tapping against the carriage roof. The sound is soothing, but the dampness only amplifies the musty scent of wool and nerves. Your groom clears his throat. "I hope," he says cautiously, "the accommodations are comfortable." He means the bridal suite. You try not to think about the bridal suite, or the bed, or the mysterious Victorian marriage manuals hidden somewhere in your luggage. Instead, you look out the window at the blurred countryside. The moon glows softly, lighting the road ahead, your future apparently illuminated but still wildly unclear. At last the carriage slows. Lanterns glow in the distance. A house looms into view, warm and inviting in the way a haunted manor might appear moments before the plot unfolds. You and your groom exchange identical expressions of cautious dread. The ride is over. The real journey is about to begin. The front door creaks open, and suddenly you're alone together. The house smells like dust and beeswax. Every shadow seems to giggle ominously. Your groom steps inside first, as Victorian etiquette demands, though his confidence is severely undermined by the way he fumbles with the lantern. It sputters once, flares brightly, then dims to a glow that casts the foyer in dramatic, unsettling shapes. You follow, feeling as if you've just walked into the first chapter of a Gothic novel, one with too many curtains and not enough common sense. The door shuts behind you, solid and final, with the kind of thud that suggests ghosts have been rattled awake. The house, now officially your house, feels much larger without servants milling about. Its silence hums through the wallpaper. Floorboards creak underfoot, either adjusting to your presence or offering a polite warning. A draft curls around your ankles as if to say, "Welcome home. Good luck." You take in your surroundings, an entrance hall lined with portraits of stern ancestors, glaring disapprovingly at your modern luxuries, like breathing and existing. One especially intense portrait appears to follow you with its eyes. You decide not to walk on that side of the hall. Your groom clears his throat. It's, bigger than I remember. Translation: he's also mildly terrified. He offers you a tour in the tone of someone hoping movement will confuse the furniture long enough to prevent hauntings. You trail behind him into a parlour filled with heavy drapery and darker secrets. Everything is upholstered in burgundy, possibly as camouflage for spilled tea or emotional repression. The silence swallows your footsteps, amplifying the occasional crackle of the fireplace embers that someone, likely a sympathetic maid, lit before your arrival. You sit on the edge of a stiff sofa. It wheezes under your weight, as though it too is startled by the whole ordeal. Your husband gestures vaguely at the surroundings. It's quite homey, don't you think? You smile politely, ignoring the feeling that the grandfather clock in the corner is judging you. Victorian homes love to announce themselves. Pipes groan dramatically. Windows rattle for emphasis. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard protests with a moan that sounds suspiciously human. It's as if the entire structure has been waiting all day to unleash its full range of unsettling noises on the newlyweds. Your groom, determined to provide comfort, offers refreshments. This involves opening a sideboard and discovering a single decanter of sherry and several glasses that haven't been washed since the last coronation. You accept a glass and pretend not to see the sediment swirling like Victorian snowflakes in the amber liquid. You sip anyway. Courage, after all, must come from somewhere. Conversation becomes the evening's most delicate dance. You talk about the weather, the carriage ride, the wedding cake, your bouquets, anything that isn't the looming unspoken question of what now. Every sentence feels like stepping around a sleeping beast. Then comes the moment when the room seems to tilt ever so slightly toward inevitability. He asks with a tremulous politeness if you'd like to see the rest of the house. You nod, knowing full well this is code for we are inching closer to the marital chamber. The staircase is steep, lit only by the flickering lantern he carries. Your dress rustles behind you, echoing off the walls like a nervous whisper. Portraits line the ascent, their painted expressions ranging from pity to smug amusement. You resist the urge to curtsy to one particularly judgmental ancestor. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretches out like a long corridor of Victorian expectations. Your groom pauses, unsure which door to open first, as though selecting the wrong one will activate a trapdoor. He eventually chooses the correct room, your room, pushing the door open with a mixture of ceremony and dread. Inside, the bridal chamber waits, tidy, hushed, and full of more lace than any human situation reasonably requires. The bed sits in the centre, massive and ominous, as if aware of its symbolic importance. Moonlight spills across the coverlet, illuminating the perfectly arranged pillows like a spotlight on destiny. Your groom turns to you. You turn to him. Both of you inhale. You've arrived. The house has accepted you. The night stretches ahead, and suddenly, the silence feels louder than any crowd. You enter the bedroom, a monument to chintz, doilies, and marital anxiety. The bed is enormous, the sheets crisp, and there's a fire burning for atmosphere. Or possibly for intimidation. The room greets you with the suffocating embrace of floral wallpaper, so aggressively patterned it could trigger a fainting spell on sight. Every surface is crowded with lace table runners, lace pillow shams, lace coverings for objects that have absolutely no business wearing lace. Even the fireplace screen is wearing lace, which feels less decorative and more like a misguided attempt to domesticate flames. Your groom steps inside a moment after you, closing the door with exaggerated care, as though afraid the house might overhear. The lock clicks softly. That tiny sound carries more weight than the vows you said hours earlier. For a moment, neither of you breathe. You both take in the room with the solemn awe of travellers encountering an unfamiliar ritual space. Heavy velvet curtains hang like theatrical backdrops, their folds deep and shadowy, perfect hiding spots for Victorian ghosts or runaway nerves. The fire crackles, sending soft orange light dancing across the furniture. It should be cozy. It is not cozy. It feels like stepping onto the stage of a play neither of you rehearsed for. Your groom clears his throat. Comfortable, isn't it? He offers, smiling weakly. You nod, unsure whether comfortable is the appropriate word for a room designed entirely to suggest that monumental expectations are about to be fulfilled on schedule. The bed dominates the space, a towering four-poster draped in gauzy curtains and optimism. The mattress is piled high with pillows, far too many pillows, arranged in such a way that removing them may require a training regimen or a pulley system. The coverlet is embroidered with flowers, birds, and what appears to be a symbolic representation of marital harmony. You try not to read too deeply into the fact that one of the birds looks particularly alarmed. The floorboards creak ominously as you move across the room, as if registering your presence with dry, gossiping voices. Ah, here they are, the wood seems to say. Let's see how they manage. You step carefully, just in case the house has a test prepared. Your husband, attempting bravery, wanders to the fireplace and pokes at the logs, with enthusiasm but no discernible purpose. Sparks fly. He startles. You pretend not to notice. It's a delicate dance, this mutual performance of calm. Conversation feels like wading through molasses. You exchange pleasant comments about the temperature, the nice quality of the curtains, the fact that someone thoughtfully placed a vase of wilting flowers near the bedside. He compliments the embroidery on your sleeve. You thank him. The air thickens with politeness and dread. Finally, when the silence is too heavy to bear, you approach the vanity, a beautiful yet intimidating piece of furniture adorned with brushes, ribbons and hairpins arranged like an arsenal. You catch your reflection in the mirror. Flushed cheeks, wind-blown curls, eyes wide enough to signal passing ships. You look like someone who's been dropped into a historical reenactment without prior notice. Behind you, you hear the soft rustle of fabric as your groom removes his gloves with the tension of a man defusing a bomb. He places them neatly on the dresser, then hesitates. You sense him rehearsing lines in his head. Something reassuring, something mature, something involving phrases like "my dear" and "if you're comfortable." But before he speaks, the house intervenes. A sudden, loud crack from the fireplace echoes through the chamber. You both jump a full inch off the floor. When you make eye contact, a small, nervous laugh escapes you. He exhales in relief and laughs too. It breaks the tension, just a little. You both sit on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the elaborate pillow arrangement. For a moment, neither of you are Victorian ideals. You're just two human beings, terrified and hopeful and trying your best. And it dawns on you. This room, with all its chints and creaks and theatrical drama, isn't here to intimidate you. Or maybe it is. Well, but it's also the beginning of something neither of you fully understand. The curtain is rising slowly, tremblingly, and your cold feet, they're perfectly reasonable. After all, even the fire seems nervous. Your new husband attempts a conversation. He uses the word conjugal twice and then offers you a sherry. You both stare at your slippers, hoping for divine intervention. The moment hangs in the air like a damp curtain. The sherry sloshes in its glass, nervously, as if it too knows it's being drafted into emotional combat. Your groom clears his throat again, a sound he has now made so many times you're beginning to suspect it's a coping mechanism rather than a respiratory need. He tries to meet your eyes, fails, and abruptly studies the wallpaper instead. The wallpaper, mercifully, does not judge him. You clutch the glass he handed you, the stem trembling slightly between your fingers. Victorian etiquette has prepared you for many things, reciting poetry, embroidering cushions, pretending your corset doesn't hurt. What it has not prepared you for is talking about anything remotely related to the subject hovering silently between you, like a blushing, prudish elephant in the room. Your groom finally attempts another sentence. I believe it is customary for married couples to, engage in certain acts. You nod, as though you've just been informed the sky's occasionally blue. Yes, I've heard. A pause. From books, he asks. No, from whispers. More silence. You both take identical sips of sherry, synchronized in your mutual panic. Victorian society has crafted an entire language dedicated solely to not saying things. Thus begins an exchange built entirely of euphemisms so vague they could apply to anything from gardening to tax preparation. He mentions fulfilling duties. You counter with ensuring harmony. He references natural inclinations. You respond with proper affection. The two of you could be discussing bees, bread making, or the price of coal. Neither of you is brave enough to breach the perimeter of literal meaning. Your husband, in a sudden burst of courage or desperation, reaches for a medical text on the bedside table. Its presence alone is alarming. Nothing good comes from Victorian medical literature. He flips through the pages, skimming illustrations that look less like anatomically accurate diagrams and more like cryptic treasure maps. According to this, he says, frowning, the process is quite simple. That's what Cousin Arabella said about the waltz, you reply, and we nearly died. He closes the book immediately. Wise. A log in the fireplace pops loudly, making both of you jump. You take that as a sign from the universe to attempt something productive. You straighten your posture, summon all the courage of your foremothers and say, perhaps we should talk plainly. He visibly pales. Plainly? Well, not too plainly, you amend. Just more plainly than this. Your husband shifts on the bed, fingers twisting in the coverlet embroidery. I must confess, he says softly, no one ever explained it to me directly. You blink. No one explained it to me at all. Oh, more staring at slippers. Slowly, tentatively, you begin assembling what little knowledge you've gleaned from cryptic hints, half-legible pamphlets, and alarming metaphors about gardens and bees. He shares his own collection, mostly derived from conversations abruptly hushed when he entered the room. You both attempt to reconcile this patchwork intel into a coherent understanding, resulting in more questions than answers, and at least one wildly inaccurate theory involving moon cycles. Yet somewhere amid the embarrassment something shifts. You laugh, softly at first, then more openly. He laughs too, rubbing the back of his neck with a sheepish smile that makes him seem far less intimidating and far more human. The anxiety loosens, the room warms. For the first time all day, you feel like you're talking to a real person rather than a role you're expected to fill. You both admit confusion, ignorance, fear. The honesty is clumsy but relieving, like finally opening a window after hours of stale Victorian propriety. Eventually the sherry glasses are set aside. The fire crackles gently. You look at each other, really look, not as groom and bride, not as symbols of duty and obedience, but as two bewildered people trying their best. The talk ends not with clarity, but with understanding. Whatever happens next, you'll figure it out together, even if both of you are armed with nothing more than imagination, goodwill, and a wildly inaccurate medical textbook. And somehow that feels like a start. You discover that removing your own dress is a logistical challenge requiring several pulleys, 2 mirrors, and a detailed map. Your husband tries to help. He gets tangled in the petticoats and nearly calls for backup. Undressing in Victorian England is less a romantic interlude and more a multi-stage engineering project, complete with risk assessments, structural vulnerabilities, and moments of existential despair. The dress you were sewn, literally sewn, into this morning now looms around you like an elegant fabric fortress. You stand in the centre of the bridal chamber, feeling equal parts glamorous and imprisoned, while your husband circles you slowly, trying to strategize. He approaches the first layer cautiously, like a man attempting to disarm a bomb he has only heard described in riddles. "Shall I pull this?" he asks, gesturing vaguely at a ribbon that could either loosen your bodice or cause the entire gown to collapse like a Victorian soufflé. You shake your head. No, not that one. I think that one controls something else. You aren't sure what. No bride is. Women spend years being taught embroidery, piano, and how to sit quietly without revealing thoughts. No one teaches the equally important life skill of exiting a wedding dress. Your husband attempts the corset laces next. The corset itself is basically a medieval relic stapled into Victorian fashion, a garment committed exclusively to squeezing you into a socially acceptable silhouette at the expense of oxygen and rib integrity. He tugs a lace tentatively. You sway. He panics. "Did I hurt you?" "No," you gasp. "But I think I briefly saw heaven." He tries again, more gently this time, loosening the ties millimetre by millimetre, like an archaeologist excavating a mummy. Eventually the corset gives a soft sigh, possibly relief, possibly revenge, and your lungs expand with a freedom you haven't known since breakfast. Then comes the bodice. Oh, the bodice. It is held together by roughly 18 buttons, 14 hooks, 5 eyelets, and one mysterious fastening that appears to defy all known laws of physics. You turn toward the mirror, hoping to see where it begins. Instead, the mirror reflects back what looks like a small fabric octopus clinging stubbornly to your torso. Your husband, determined, begins unbuttoning from the top. He quickly loses count. At one point he unfastens a button, only to discover 3 more hiding beneath it, like some kind of textile hydra. You can hear his breathing grow unsteady, not from romance, but from battle fatigue. Next to the petticoats, plural of course, layers upon layers, each heavier and more belligerent than the one before, he lifts the first. You rise slightly, buoyed like a balloon. He ducks under the second, disappearing entirely into the folds. You hear muffled distress. "Are you all right?" You call. Yes. Just one moment. I believe I've been consumed." He emerges, hair tousled, dignity barely intact. The stockings present their own challenge. They are held up by garters so complicated they could double as maritime knots. You attempt to untie them yourself, but your arms are too exhausted from hours of ceremonial posing. He offers to assist, then immediately regrets it when one garter snaps free and nearly takes his eye out. By now, the room looks like the aftermath of a genteel hurricane. Piles of linen, lace, silk and taffeta litter the floor in pastel drifts. The bed is half covered in discarded layers. You stand in a chemise, breathless, hair escaping its pins like rebellious tendrils of victory. Your husband stands before you, equally breathless, not from passion but from sheer athletic exertion. He wipes his brow. You both take a moment to survey the textile carnage. "Is it always like this?" he asks softly. You nod. Every single dress. There is a silence. Then, in perfect synchrony, you both burst into tired, relieved laughter, because somehow in the midst of corset warfare and petticoat entanglement, you discovered something unexpectedly tender. Neither of you knows what you're doing, but you're learning together. One button, one tug, one near garter incident at a time. Before anything else, there's the matter of freshening up. The water is icy, the soap smells of lye, and the towel is embroidered with someone else's initials. It's not clear if this is a blessing or a curse. Victorian marital hygiene is an ordeal no one prepared you for. There are no soothing scented oils, no warm bath, no lavender-infused steam. Instead, you face a porcelain wash basin filled with water so cold it could preserve a salmon. The pitcher beside it gives off a faint metallic tang, suggesting this water was drawn at some point during Queen Victoria's early reign and has been waiting resentfully ever since. The room flickers with candlelight, which is allegedly flattering but actually makes everything look like an ominous shadow puppet performance. You approach the washstand with the caution of someone nearing a wild animal. Your husband hovers on the other side of the room pretending to examine the bookshelf, but you can see his reflection in the mirror. He's equally horrified by the concept of washing under these conditions. You dip a hand into the basin. It's worse than expected. The water is so cold it feels philosophical. You wince. From behind you, he winces in sympathy. You splash your face first because that seems manageable. The shock is immediate. Your skin shrieks. Your entire body wakes up in protest. You grip the edge of the stand for stability, blinking rapidly as if you've just been baptized into a cult you didn't volunteer for. The soap is another matter entirely. It is a pale beige brick with the texture of dried despair and a scent best described as agricultural. It lathers only if you plead with it directly. You rub the bar between your palms, producing exactly 2 bubbles and an overwhelming urge to cry. As you scrub lightly, oh so lightly, your mind drifts to modern luxuries that definitely do not exist yet. Hot running water, scented shower gels, towels that aren't monogrammed with the initials of someone who may or may not be alive. You want to weep at the idea of warm plumbing. Then comes the moment of no return. Washing the parts of yourself that Victorian modesty has spent decades convincing you do not exist. You try to be quick, discreet, efficient. The cold water punishes you regardless. Every splash feels like a scolding whisper from the ancestors. On the other side of the room, your husband is attempting his own version of cleansing, a spectacle you witness only through the reflection in the mirror. He lifts the washcloth, hesitates, and then settles for splashing water onto his face, chest, and possibly the floor. He attempts the soap. The soap slips. The soap skids. The soap nearly escapes under the wardrobe. You pretend not to notice. He mutters, "Good heavens," as though he's been personally wronged by the concept of water. When you finish, you reach for the towel, the one embroidered with mysterious initials. It is stiff, scratchy, and smells faintly of cloves. You pat your skin, which now feels both frozen and somehow aflame. He takes his turn, drying himself with the solemn dignity of a man determined not to reveal how uncomfortable he is. You suspect this towel has witnessed many newlywed catastrophes and is silently judging you. Then comes the question neither of you knows how to ask. Are we ready? You exchange glances, both of you flushed, not with romance, but with the after effects of a hygiene routine that borders on punishment. You laugh softly, breaking the tension, and he smiles in relief. You have endured the frigid basin. You have survived the soap, you have confronted the towel. Surely, after conquering such terrors, you can face whatever comes next. Still, as you blow out the candles, you can't help wondering, was this freshening up meant to prepare you or test you? The moment arrives. It is quieter, clumsier, and far more confusing than anything you imagined. Somewhere a clock ticks with malicious intent. The silence in the bridal chamber is so complete it feels staged, as though someone has paid the housemaids to stop breathing for dramatic effect. The fire crackles, the floorboard sighs. You and your new husband stand at opposite ends of the room like two actors waiting for a script that never arrived. You step closer, he steps closer. You both step back. It's a delicate choreography of nerves, elegant, if interpreted generously. Your husband clears his throat. Again! You lose count of how many times he's done so tonight. It may be his version of emotional expression. So, he says. So, you echo. Silence crushes the space between you like an overbearing aunt. You both try smiling at the same time. That somehow makes it worse. He gestures vaguely at the bed, then immediately regrets the gesture. He looks at the curtains, the fireplace, his shoes, anything but you, as though direct eye contact might trigger spontaneous combustion. You decide to perch on the edge of the bed because sitting feels like progress. The mattress wheezes beneath you, a sound startling enough that you jump, clutching the coverlet. He laughs nervously. You laugh nervously. The mattress groans again. You stop laughing. He sits beside you, leaving what Victorian etiquette books would call a respectable distance, and what modern audiences would call a chasm wide enough to host a square dance. His hands hover awkwardly in his lap as though he's afraid to put them anywhere that might be misinterpreted. Finally, he speaks. I suppose, he says cautiously, that this is the part where we are yes, you say. I think so. Neither of you elaborates. The ticking clock grows louder, gleefully counting down to your collective unravelling. Every second sounds like a taunt. Good luck, newlyweds. Hope you studied. Your husband, mustering his courage, tries for a practical approach. Perhaps, he says, we should begin with something simple. Simple, of course, is a subjective term. You shift slightly, turning toward him. He mirrors the motion. You reach for his hand, he reaches for yours. Except he reaches too quickly. You reach too hesitantly, and the result is a gentle but undeniable collision of knuckles. You both murmur apologies, rubbing your hands like two children who have just been reprimanded by a schoolmistress. You try again. This time the touch is soft, tentative, and strangely comforting. His hand is warm, yours is shaking. Together the effect is less sensual and more like two nervous pigeons attempting diplomacy. Encouraged, he leans closer, your shoulders touch. Your breath catches, not because of any grand romantic revelation, but because neither of you knows where to put your noses. Your foreheads bump, your hair snags on his coat button. He whispers, sorry. You whisper, ow. It's beautiful in the way only earnest disasters can be. At last your faces hover inches apart. He closes his eyes too soon. You close yours too late. Your first attempt at a kiss lands somewhere between his upper lip and his left nostril. You retreat instantly, mortified. Oh dear, he mutters. Yes, you agree. Silence returns, now joined by its cousin shame. But then, slowly, carefully, you try again. This time you find the right angle, the right pace, the right softness. It's shy, warm, and undeniably human. A small victory. You feel tension melt from your shoulders. He exhales into the kiss like a man who has been holding his breath since the engagement announcement. For a moment, everything is still. And then the fire cracks loudly, startling you both apart like startled cats. You stare at each other. You start laughing. Not polite bridal laughter, honest, helpless laughter born from relief and absurdity. He laughs too, shoulders shaking, eyes bright. And there, in that ridiculous, lovely moment, a shocking realization dawns. The wedding night isn't about perfection. It's about two utterly unprepared people learning, fumbling, apologizing, and trying again, together. Act 1 ends not with mastery, but with mutual courage, and the comforting knowledge that Act 2 will be just as clumsy, just as confusing, and somehow exactly as it should be. You remember your mother's whispered advice about keeping a sprig of lavender under your pillow to ward off night terrors? It doesn't help, neither does the sherry. The lavender is currently poking you in the ear. The sherry has done nothing except warm your knees, and the room feels thick with superstition, centuries of it, pressed into the wallpaper like botanical specimens of collective panic. You lie beneath the weight of embroidered blankets, heart thrumming like a startled sparrow, while your husband sits stiffly at the edge of the bed, looking as though he's about to take an exam for which no notes exist. Victorian households are full of rules for every possible situation: how to greet visitors, how to pour tea, how to die politely of tuberculosis. But when it comes to the wedding night, the advice devolves into unhelpful riddles and ominous glances. All you've been told is to think of lavender, remain composed, and never let the fire go out. You're not sure which of these applies to the marital act, but the fire is crackling, so at least you have that going for you. Your husband breaks the silence first. Do you feel prepared? No, you reply honestly. Do you? He shakes his head. Not in the slightest. You appreciate his candour. It's difficult to maintain fear when both of you look equally terrified. He inches closer. You inch closer. The bed creaks, groaning under the pressure of expectation. The lavender falls out of your pillow and plops onto the blanket like a dropped baton in a relay race neither of you wanted to run. Perhaps, he offers cautiously, we should begin with something small, such as, he considers, holding hands. It is both sweet and absurd, but also comforting. You agree. And so you clasp hands again, this time without the frantic pigeon energy of Act 1. Your palms are warm. His thumb brushes your knuckles awkwardly, then deliberately, then with growing confidence. The world does not end. This is promising. You try to ignore the Victorian superstitions swirling around in your mind. That the first night sets the tone for the entire marriage, that lavender summons good spirits, that an unlit corner invites bad ones, that stepping into the marital bed with the left foot brings discord. You have no idea which foot you used. You briefly consider checking. Then he says, I read somewhere that we should blow out the candles, for ambience. But Victorian candles are not straightforward. They sputter, they droop, they lean. Blowing them out is a performance requiring precision airflow. You try a gentle puff. Nothing. You puff again. One flame flickers, then defiantly strengthens. Your husband joins in, both of you leaning over the bedside like determined bellows. On the third try, the candles surrender. Darkness washes over the room, leaving only the glow of the fire and a sudden intimate quiet. You hear your husband inhale. You inhale too. The mattress, now dimly lit, appears less intimidating and more like a place where two people might possibly survive the night. You shift closer. So does he. Your knees touch. You feel his breath, warm and hesitant, brushing your cheek. The moment deepens. Not perfect, not graceful, but real. Then he whispers, Do you suppose the lavender should be repositioned? You snort, an involuntary, unladylike snort. Horror flashes across your face. Then he starts laughing, and then you do too. The laughter dissolves the tension like warm sunlight melting frost. You lean into him, forehead to forehead, both of you shaking with relief. When the laughter fades, the room feels different, softer, less haunted by the expectations of ancestors, more your own. With renewed courage, you explore slowly, gently, learning each other not as mythical husband and wife, but as two awkward humans with hopes, fears, and an alarming lack of practical instruction. The fire crackles soothingly. The lavender lies forgotten. The clock continues its malicious ticking, but somehow it no longer feels like a threat. And in the dim glow of the embers, you discover the quiet truth Victorian society never says aloud. There is no right way to begin a marriage. There is only trying, together. Act 2 ends not with superstition, but with sincerity, and the comforting knowledge that whatever mysteries remain, you won't face them alone. You awake to the sound of housemaids giggling outside your door. You feel changed, though whether for better or worse is up for debate. There is a note on your breakfast tray that simply reads, "Congratulations." The sunlight creeping through the lace curtains is offensively cheerful, brightening a room that looks like it has witnessed a Victorian séance rather than a wedding night. The fire has died to embers, your carefully arranged pillows lie scattered like fallen soldiers, and you're acutely aware that your hair is somewhere. Not on your head in any recognisable form, at least. Your husband stirs beside you, blinking blearily at the ceiling as if trying to remember what century he's in. He offers a small, timid smile, the kind shared by two people who survived a natural disaster and aren't entirely sure they did it correctly. You attempt to smile in return, but it feels more like an apology. The giggling in the hallway intensifies. Housemaids, armed with fresh linens and juicy speculation, linger near the door like Victorian paparazzi. You imagine them pressing their ears to the wood panels, hoping to catch whispers of scandal or triumph. Instead, all they'd hear is you quietly panicking and your husband debating whether to drink his tea or crawl under the bed and never emerge again. Speaking of tea, the breakfast tray is a masterpiece of mixed signals. The soft-boiled egg leans precariously in its cup, resembling your emotional state. The toast is burnt on one side, suggesting someone got distracted while gossiping. The tea is weak enough to taste like regret. And then there's the note. A single word followed by a question mark. Congratulations. Even your breakfast isn't sure how to feel about last night. Victorian society loves to pretend marital intimacy is simple and obvious, despite refusing to explain it to anyone. As a result, you now face the morning with the fragile confidence of a person who has completed a test without knowing how it was graded. You and your husband exchange glances, tentative, questioning, mildly traumatized. "How do you feel?" he asks gently. You consider your answer. Different, you say. Not worse, but not entirely better. He nods with profound relief. Yes, precisely. You sit up slowly, gathering the bedsheets around you like armour. Last night's events play back in your mind in a montage of candlelight, awkward limbs, nervous laughter, one minor elbow accident, and a surprising moment of tenderness that makes your stomach flutter now in a way it didn't then. But then the doubt creeps in. Was it supposed to be like that? Should it have been more graceful, less confusing, more like the whispered stories from girls who heard from cousins who read secret pamphlets? Or is everyone just pretending they know what they're doing until someone dies or invents therapy? Your husband seems to share the same existential dread. He clears his throat, of course, and says, "I hope it was acceptable." "Acceptable," you repeat, incredulous and amused. "It wasn't a dinner party." "Well, no, but of course it was acceptable. It was us." He exhales, shoulders dropping in relief. It's the first moment all morning that feels solid. You decide to brave the breakfast tray. The tea is as disappointing as expected, but it's warm, and warmth feels like progress. Your husband reaches for his cup as well, staring into it as though hoping it contains answers. It does not, only tannin. The maids finally knock, 3 soft taps that somehow communicate an entire novella of judgment and excitement. You muster your dignity, sit a little taller, and call, "Come in." They enter with choreography, pretending not to look at the room while absolutely looking at everything. Their smiles are too wide, their curtsies too enthusiastic. "Will you need anything else, madam?" the boldest asks. You pause. What you want is reassurance, clarity, a handbook that doesn't involve gardening metaphors, and possibly another 4 hours of sleep. "No," you say, softly. "I think we're all right." The maids withdraw, the door closes, silence returns, comfortable silence this time. Your husband reaches for your hand, you let him hold it, and in that small, steady gesture, you realise something unexpected. Yes, you feel changed. Not entirely for better, not entirely for worse, but certainly for real, and real at least, is a start. The self-doubt lingers, of course, but so does the warmth of his hand. And maybe the morning after isn't meant to answer everything. Maybe it's simply meant to say, "You made it this far. Keep going." Later you discover a medical pamphlet hidden behind a vase that offers advice so vague and alarming that you consider moving to Canada. it mentions marital relations and hysteria in the same sentence. The pamphlet is thin, brittle, and printed in the sort of faded ink that suggests it has traumatized generations before you. Its title is unnecessarily dramatic, a guide to marital harmony and the preservation of feminine delicacy, which already implies that at least one of your organs may fall out if you breathe incorrectly. You sit on the edge of the bed, the morning light illuminating each anxious page, while your husband pretends not to notice your escalating panic. The introduction begins by assuring you that marriage is a noble undertaking. Blessed by God and Queen, this seems harmless enough. But within 2 sentences, it warns that excessive enthusiasm may lead to hysteria, fainting spells, and a general decline in feminine constitution. What qualifies as excessive enthusiasm? The pamphlet does not say. It simply advises restraint, a favourite Victorian word meaning never allow your heart rate to exceed that of a sleepy tortoise. Your husband glances over your shoulder. Is it helpful? No, you say. I think it might be a threat. You flip to the next section, where things take a turn for the bizarre. A diagram appears, if one can call it that, showing 2 faceless silhouettes engaging in something the pamphlet labels as the marital embrace. The illustration is so abstract it could also represent 2 people shaking hands over a table. You tilt it sideways. It does not help. Below the diagram, a stern paragraph warns that improper positioning during the marital act could result in energetic disturbances, misalignment of the humours, or, in extreme cases, spiritual fatigue. You reread this, unsure whether the author was a doctor, a philosopher, or someone who got lost on the way to a séance. Curiosity drives you onward. The chapter titled Wifely Conduct in the Evening Hours advises that a bride should maintain silent cooperation, avoid sudden movements, and refrain from expressing opinions about the temperature of the room. It also suggests that husbands, when confronted with confusion, should consult a clergyman. You imagine your husband knocking on the vicar's door at midnight with questions about pillows and positioning, and you nearly choke on your own despair. Then comes the truly alarming section on preventing hysteria in the marital sphere. Here the pamphlet claims that women are prone to sudden emotional outbursts if overstimulated by novelty. This includes loud noises, colourful wallpaper, and unexpected gestures from the husband. You glance around your room, overwhelming floral prints, aggressively patterned curtains, a bedspread featuring birds in unnatural positions, and begin to suspect your entire house is a hysteria trap. Your husband sits beside you now, gently taking the pamphlet from your hands. He reads a line, winces, and reads another. This can't be right, he mutters. It can't even be wrong, you reply. It's beyond the realm of accuracy. The 2 of you continue flipping pages. One section suggests drinking warm milk before marital relations to steady the nerves. Another warns husbands not to sneeze during intimate moments. A footnote recommends opening a window afterward to invite harmony into the home, as though harmony is a draft-prone cousin who lives nearby. You find a final chapter near the back, Troubleshooting the Wedding Night, which offers revolutionary advice such as try not to panic and remain conscious if possible. The only practical tip in the entire pamphlet is printed in tiny script at the bottom. Marital matters are best understood through experience rather than reading materials. You slam the booklet shut, enraged that it waited until page 37 to become reasonable. Your husband laughs, genuinely, warmly, and places the cursed booklet back behind the vase where it belongs. The 2 of you sit together on the bed, united in your shared disbelief that society expects couples to navigate marriage using cryptic documents written by people who are afraid of ankles. And strangely enough, the pamphlet's absurdity comforts you, because compared to that, your wedding night, awkward, tender, clumsy, real, suddenly feels perfectly normal. You lean against your husband with a sigh. Let's never read another manual, you say. He nods, agreed. From now on, we figure it out ourselves. A radical, modern thought, one that feels far safer than moving to Canada. You begin to realise that the wedding night was only the beginning. There are more mysteries ahead, locked rooms, peculiar traditions, and a lifetime of learning what exactly your in-laws mean by a proper marriage. Victorian matrimony, it turns out, is not a single event but an extended puzzle, one assembled from cryptic customs, half-explained expectations, and an endless parade of people offering contradictory advice with troubling confidence. The wedding night might have felt like the final exam, but marriage itself is the entire syllabus, complete with pop quizzes from meddling relatives and homework assignments you never asked for. Your new husband, still visibly proud that neither of you fainted last night, leads you through the house to show you your future domain. This is both sweet and deeply concerning. He opens doors with the enthusiasm of a tour guide and the caution of someone unsure what the servants may have left behind. Linen closets, a sewing room, a strange hallway with bad lighting and worse wallpaper. You nod politely, hoping your face conveys gratitude rather than utter confusion. Then you notice a door at the end of the corridor, stout, locked and unmarked. You gesture toward it. "Oh, that," he says, far too casually. "That's nothing. Nothing is never nothing. Victorian homes practically require a locked door to maintain dramatic tension." "Why is it locked?" you ask. He hesitates. "Tradition." That word again. Victorian tradition is flexible enough to include both harmless superstitions and mild psychological warfare. As you continue the tour, you encounter the peculiar customs your new life expects you to uphold. For instance, the household believes it's unlucky to begin a week without polishing the silver. The maids avoid sweeping after sunset because it brushes out good fortune. And your mother-in-law insists that wives should never sit in the third chair at dinner, as it encourages wayward thoughts and poor digestion. Speaking of your mother-in-law, she arrives precisely when you least expect her, materializing like a perfumed ghost with unsolicited wisdom. She greets you with a kiss on the cheek that feels vaguely like an inspection. "My dear," she begins, "marriage is a lifelong journey of patience, refinement, and loyal devotion." You smile, uncertain whether she's describing matrimony or training a prized spaniel. She leans in, and remember, a proper wife never raises her voice, contradicts her husband, or eats the last slice of pudding. You mentally cross off all three as immediate impossibilities. Your husband, to his credit, tries to soften her instructions by offering his own interpretation. Mother means well. She means that every household has its own way of doing things. His tone suggests these ways are often arbitrary, confusing, and occasionally terrifying. You return to the bedroom later, hoping for respite. Instead, you find yet another mystery. The mattress has been remade so tightly you're afraid to touch it. The pillows have multiplied. Someone has embroidered a quote about wifely virtue onto the new throw blanket. The lavender sprig has mysteriously returned to its place under your pillow. Even meals become riddles. Breakfast includes dishes you've never seen before, kedgeree, potted shrimp, an egg prepared in a manner that defies classification. The servants observe your reactions with great interest, as if the way you butter your bread reveals your moral character. Throughout the day, whispered comments follow you everywhere. "She'll learn, poor thing, I give it a month before she begs for advice." And always, a proper marriage requires effort. No one explains what that effort entails. Does it refer to conversation, courting, clothing maintenance, negotiating with in-laws, surviving the locked door at the end of the hall? In moments of solitude, rare though they are, you sit at the vanity and stare at your reflection. You look the same, yet not the same. Somewhere between the vows, the lace, the lavender, and the laughter, you have shifted. You're not merely a bride now. You're a Victorian wife, tasked with navigating a universe that seems to have been designed by sentimental poets and deranged architects. You realize, with equal parts fear and fondness, that this life will unfold slowly, one perplexing custom at a time. You and your husband will dodge superstitions, decode advice, survive dinners, and eventually hopefully laugh at the bewildering spectacle of it all. Because Victorian marital bliss isn't a thing you receive, it's a mystery you solve together. Just as you begin to settle in for your first night of post-nuptial confusion, there's a gentle but persistent tapping at the door. It's your mother-in-law, clutching a tray of tepid broth and unsolicited advice. She wishes you endurance and many sons, then lingers suspiciously long, as if expecting to hear fireworks. You wonder if Victorian etiquette allows you to barricade the door. You and your husband freeze in perfect synchronization, bodies stiff, eyebrows raised, eyes wide with horror. The candles flicker dramatically, as if even the flames know this is a terrible time for parental visitation. You manage a polite strangled, "Come in," before your husband can stop you. The door creaks open, and there she stands. a monument of maternal authority wrapped in shawls and righteousness. Her expression is soft, pitying, and deeply intrusive. She sweeps into the room without waiting to be invited, because why wait when you have moral superiority and orthopedic shoes? "My dears," she whispers, though loudly enough that the servants 3 rooms over likely heard her, "I just thought I should check on you, make sure you're settling in." Settling in. As though you've just moved into a cottage rather than stepped into one of life's most bewildering chapters. She approaches the bed too closely and carefully sets down the tray. The broth sloshes. You suspect it has been reheated several times, each reheating more ceremonial than culinary. "It's for your strength," she says, looking pointedly at you. You're not comforted. Your husband steps forward, trying to block her view of the bed's dishevelled state. Unfortunately, he chooses that exact moment to trip over a stray slipper, nearly knocking into her. She steadies him with one hand and pats his cheek. Nervous, my boy. He makes a noise that could be either agreement or a plea for rescue. Leaving him to internally combust, she turns her full attention to you. "My dear child," she says, "sitting beside you with all the subtlety of a grand piano, a wedding night is a sacred duty. It requires courage, grace, and above all, a firm commitment to tradition. Tradition. Your stomach drops. Victorians weaponize this word. Tradition can mean anything, from don't sit in that chair to avoid emotional expression at all costs. You smile politely, clutching the blanket. Of course. She nods approvingly, unaware that your voice just hit the upper register of fear. Then she begins her speech. Every Victorian mother-in-law has one. A carefully curated monologue, filled with vague metaphors, admonitions about mysterious dangers, and more references to your reproductive duty than you ever wanted to hear within your lifetime. She speaks of fruitful unions, wifely obligations, the foundation of society, and the importance of never startling a husband, especially on the first night. You wonder what qualifies as startling. Standing? Breathing? Speaking without a lace handkerchief? As she warms to her topic, she lowers her voice to impart an especially personal piece of wisdom. When your father-in-law and I were married, your soul leaves your body. Your husband coughs loudly. Mother, perhaps this isn't necessary, she holds up a hand. Hush. Your wife needs to understand the gravity of her position. Gravity is certainly present. Also, nausea. She rises at last, rearranging her shawls with the solemn air of someone concluding a funeral service. "I know you'll do splendidly," she assures you. "Just remember, a happy home begins in the bridal chamber." You're almost certain she winks. Then finally, blessedly, she steps out. "Sleep well," she calls, but not too soundly. The door closes. Silence returns like a panicked friend diving behind furniture. You and your husband lock eyes. You both exhale, then laugh, quietly, hysterically. You push the broth tray aside. "Do you think," you whisper, "we're allowed to lock the door from now on?" Your husband nods with absolute conviction. Victorian etiquette may not explicitly endorse barricading against midnight maternal intrusions, but surely even tradition has its limits. You recall a dozen horror stories whispered at finishing school, tales of brides swooning from shock, fainting dead away, or fleeing to the stables on the fateful night. Some say a cousin's cousin once burst into tears upon seeing her husband's bare ankle. The line between education and campfire ghost stories is blurry at best. Victorian girls are raised on a strict diet of embroidery, deportment, and fear. Real, bone-deep fear, packaged in lace and whispered behind teacups. At school, your teachers never dared explain anything directly. Instead, they let the older girls spin their own mythology, an entire folklore of matrimonial terror that filled the gaps left by adults too squeamish to teach practical information. One legend insisted that brides were required to complete a secret strength test before entering the marital bed. No one knew what the test entailed, but it must have been awful because Lucy Hargreaves once cried for an entire week afterward. Another rumour claimed that if a bride didn't faint during the wedding night, she wasn't properly modest. Several students practised fainting just in case. There was also the infamous tale of Mrs. Fairburn, a newlywed who allegedly ran screaming from her room after witnessing her husband remove his evening boot. According to popular retelling, the sight of his bare foot sent her spiralling into what Victorian physicians would diplomatically label a nervous episode. and what modern observers would call extremely understandable. The stories escalated from improbable to unhinged. One claimed a bride mistook her groom's discarded cravat for a venomous snake. Another described a husband who sneezed at an inopportune moment, causing his bride to leap from the bed and barricade herself in the pantry until dawn. The pantry incident became legendary. Students reenacted it with giggles and flour sacks, and rumours swirled that the bride never fully recovered from the emotional stress of marital sneezing. You remember sitting with your classmates by the dormitory fire, the light flickering on their wide-eyed faces as they shared each tale with reverence and dread. "Do husbands really turn into animals after midnight?" one girl asked nervously. "Only if you feed them too much pudding," another replied, dead serious. Someone else added, "My aunt told me to wear boots to bed in case I have to run." It was unclear whether this advice was practical or metaphorical. Not that the adults were helpful. When asked directly, teachers responded with evasions so dramatic they bordered on performance art. Miss Plimpton once dropped a teapot after a student innocently inquired about the duties of a wife. The headmistress banned questions entirely after that, and instituted a rule that all inquiries must concern either geography or piano technique. Your mother's guidance was no better. She delivered vague warnings about a woman's burden, suggested keeping smelling salts nearby, and emphasized the importance of remaining pliable. Pliable, in this context, seemed to mean accepting your fate without screaming. So naturally, when the wedding night finally arrived, you were armed not with knowledge, but with folklore. Dangerous, inaccurate, occasionally hilarious folklore. And now, in the dim light of your marital chamber, you find those stories resurfacing like ghosts from your school days. Was there really an ankle-related risk? Could your husband suddenly become feral? Should you be wearing boots right now, just in case? Your husband shifts beside you, adjusting a blanket, utterly unaware of the internal mythology spiraling through your mind. He smiles nervously. You smile nervously. You both begin to laugh, softly, the tension loosening. It dawns on you that none of the myths were ever about real danger. They were coping mechanisms, ridiculous, exaggerated attempts to make sense of the impossible mystery every Victorian bride faces. The real truth isn't frightening at all, it's this. Two bewildered humans, fumbling through the unknown with more hope than horror. Still, you tuck your slippers a little closer to the bed, just in case the ankle story wasn't entirely exaggerated. A letter from the family physician arrives at breakfast, offering essential guidance on your wifely duties. You're instructed to avoid overexertion, keep the windows cracked, and, under no circumstances, allow yourself to become overstimulated by sensation or excitement. You begin to suspect Victorian medicine was invented by people who'd never met a married couple. The envelope is thick, official-looking, and sealed with enough wax to suggest a royal decree rather than practical marital advice. Your husband opens it with reverence. You brace yourself. Any letter that arrives before tea has the potential to ruin the day. He unfolds the paper, clears his throat, a ritual now as familiar as your corset laces, and reads aloud with the solemnity of a judge. Dear Mr. and Mrs. As you embark upon the noble journey of marriage, it is imperative that you adhere to certain medical principles to ensure the stability of your home and the maintenance of your constitutions. You immediately know you're in trouble. Any sentence beginning with noble journey ends in nonsense. The letter continues, warning against vigorous marital activity, which could allegedly cause fatigue, fainting, or the dreaded Victorian catch-all, nervous imbalance. You glance at your husband. He stares back, wide-eyed, as though accused of plotting an Olympic event rather than simply attempting to be a functional spouse. Then comes the document's pièce de résistance. To reduce the risk of emotional overstimulation, it is advised that couples refrain from excessive affection, elevated heart rate, or exposure to exhilarating stimuli such as loud music or sudden gestures. Sudden gestures. You choke on your tea. Your husband reads the line twice, squinting at it as though hoping it will unwrite itself. You picture the physician, quill in hand, scribbling furiously. No sudden gestures, as though marriages everywhere are dissolving into chaos because husbands are waving too enthusiastically across the dinner table. The instructions get worse. Wives should ensure that windows remain slightly ajar to promote the circulation of fresh air, which has a calming influence upon feminine nerves. You look at the nearest window, currently sealed shut to keep out a frigid wind, and wonder if the doctor intends to kill you via pneumonia. another gem. Husbands must avoid placing undue expectations upon their wives, who may experience temporary lapses in fortitude due to atmospheric pressure or lunar influence. Lunar influence. At this point, the physician is just guessing wildly. You half expect the next line to warn against ghosts, spicy foods, or wearing the colour red. The letter also suggests that, in moments of marital tension, the couple should partake in a glass of medicinal sherry, followed by quiet reflection. It's essentially telling you to drink and nap your way through conflict, advice you're shockingly not opposed to. But then the tone shifts, offering guidance clearly meant to sound clinical and reassuring. Do not be alarmed if the wife exhibits symptoms of temporary disorientation, heightened emotionality, or a tendency toward philosophical inquiry. These reactions are normal following the big life event. You and your husband exchange a look. He mouths, "Philosophical inquiry?" You shrug. Maybe you're supposed to contemplate the curvature of spoons or the meaning of lace trim. The final recommendation is the most baffling. Marital relations should be approached with moderation. Avoid extremes in temperature, exertion, and enthusiasm. A calm demeanour ensures longevity. Enthusiasm, the great Victorian threat. You imagine a future where you must maintain a perfectly serene expression at all times. No smiling too brightly, no laughter louder than a soft cough. Certainly no emotional displays during anniversaries. Your husband imagines it too, judging by his horrified expression. When he lowers the letter, the room falls silent. The clock ticks. A maid coughs discreetly in the hallway. You both sit there, processing the fact that your relationship is now under medical surveillance by someone who thinks the moon might destabilize your marriage. Finally, your husband says, voice trembling with restrained amusement, "Shall we ignore most of this?" You nod vigorously. All of it. Every single word. And as you tuck the absurd document into a drawer, perhaps for future comedic relief, you realize Victorian medicine isn't just outdated, it's delusional, and your marriage will be healthier the further you stay from its expertise. So tonight, as you drift off in your soft, familiar bed, one free of lace doilies, cryptic manuals, and the faint scent of lavender panic, maybe take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come since the days of the Victorian wedding night. Remember the anxious flutter of the bridal morning, the unhelpful wisdom passed down by women who seemed determined to keep the mystery alive, the marathon of buttons and ribbons and the sheer confusion of it all? Imagine facing that world with nothing but a corset, a lemon for luck, and a head full of terrifying rumours. Those first bewildering hours, awkward, hilarious, sometimes mortifying, were a rite of passage for generations of brides who didn't have Google, group chats, or a handy YouTube explainer. Yet through it all, Victorian brides found their way. They endured family inspections, midnight lectures, and enough etiquette rules to flatten a herd of oxen. They puzzled over lace nightgowns, deciphered medical pamphlets written by men who'd never seen a marriage, and braved the wild unknown of marital bliss armed only with hope and a stiff upper lip. And yes, most managed to laugh, love, and muddle through, even if no one ever truly explained the purpose of the lavender. So as you curl up tonight, give a little thanks for modern wisdom, clear instructions, and the freedom to ask awkward questions out loud. Maybe smile for all those who came before us, blushing and brave, stepping nervously into new lives, one button, one superstition, one long, strange night at a time. Because history is proof that people are resilient, resourceful, and sometimes just gloriously ridiculous. And the next time you worry about being unprepared for life's big moments, just remember, at least your wedding night probably didn't involve a mother-in-law, a haunted nightgown, and a medical manual from 1867. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of corsets, confusion, and unexplained lemons. Good night.